Congratulations, you've made it to the last Chaucer video, and this is dedicated to the topic of genre. One of the reasons why Chaucer is considered one of the greatest writers of all time is because of what he does with genre. Every literary culture is going to have a wide range of genres, just as with movies today, there are a wide range of genres from romantic comedies to thrillers to horror and so on. And even within those genres, there are subgenres, right? So what Chaucer is doing in the Canterbury Tales is he's using the conceit of the tale, right? All these very different people all telling a tale. He's using that as a pretext to sort of imitate, mess with, and combine a bunch of different medieval literary genres. In many cases, to comedic effect. And he sometimes will just combine genres in a way that is really ridiculous. It's supposed to be ridiculous and therefore humorous. And I want to give you a good example of that, of the tales that we are reading. The tale that does this most effectively is the Nun's Priest's Tale. This is a tale about a rooster named Chanticleer and an unnamed fox. Okay. So let's talk about the genres that are in play here. The most obvious genre is one that goes all the way back to antiquity, all the way back to Aesop, and that is the beast fable, right? Certainly beast fables were popular in Chaucer's time. There was even a story about a fox and a rooster named Chanticleer that was circulating in Chaucer's day. So I'll just remind you of what I said in a previous video about originality. It was not seen as gauche or uninspired to take a story that's already been told and tell it again. The main requirement is that you do something different with it, and I think Chaucer certainly does that here. Well, what qualities, what are the features of a beast fable? What would you expect to find, and do we find them here? You would expect to find practical wisdom. Slow and steady wins the race, or something like that. A clear moral at the end. You expect talking animals, animals that in many ways behave and speak like humans do. And so, superficially anyway, the Nun's Priest's Tale really fits the bill. You've got talking animals, and you have a moral at the end that the narrator offers. But along the way, Chaucer is going to subvert many of our expectations about beast fables, right? So we think we're reading, okay, this is a beast fable, but then he's going to throw some things in there that are going to make us think, now wait a minute, what's going on here? So let's, a number of things here. Beast fables are supposed to be kind of moral tales, right? But the characters in the story, including the hero, if we want to call him that, Chanticleer, are not really great paragons of morality. In fact, Chanticleer and the other chickens tend to be totally amoral. So, we learn from the very beginning that Chanticleer has many wives. He's a polygamist, and he's also married to his sister. So he's guilty of incest as well. These are strange details to be given very early in the tale. Furthermore, Chanticleer is supposed to be the wise character. That's the impression we're given at the very beginning. He gives this very compelling, learned speech about why dreams should be taken seriously. So we expect, okay, this is going to be the character who has wisdom to offer, but then he behaves in a kind of contradictory manner. He talks about how seriously dreams should be taken, and which is his reason for staying up in the rafters of the barn, because he had a dream that something very bad would happen to him if he came down. But what does he do in the end? He comes down. Why? Because he's hungry and he wants to have sex. Okay? So already we're thinking, okay, we're going to be learning about morality from this particular chicken. Doesn't seem very promising. In addition, as I said before, we expect a clear moral at the end of a story such as this, but there are huge chunks of the story that have absolutely nothing to do with the moral that is offered at the end. The tale itself is 626 lines long. Only 60 are spent on the actual story. And not only that, but there are red herrings. There are moments in the story where we think, oh, okay, well, maybe this is the moral. And then the story just moves on, and it turns out that that's kind of well, as I said, a red herring. So, there's a story told about two friends on a pilgrimage, and this is a story that Chanticleer is telling. And he gets to the end of the story, and he says, well, murder will out. In other words, if you commit murder, it's going to catch up with you. You're going to be caught. And that really has nothing to do with the moral at the end of the story. It's almost as if Chanticleer is kind of forgetting what he's supposed to be talking about. So that's a little bit disconcerting. Then you get to the end, and one of the morals that's explicitly presented at the end is that you should avoid flatterers. That doesn't quite make sense, because really, it would seem that the point of the story is that you should be a flatterer, because that's how Chanticleer escapes in the end. He flatters the fox. So you get to the very end of the story on page 231, and the narrator says, take the grain and let the chaff be still. In other words, just take the morals from this story, and the rest of it, you can just kind of ignore. But the question is, well, what is the moral exactly? So it's still not even quite clear by the end what the real moral is supposed to be. And finally, something else that makes it hard to take it seriously as a beast fable. I mean, if you're reading a beast fable, okay, the animals are going to talk, they're going to do some human-like things, but Chaucer pushes this to an absurd degree. So not only can the animals talk, but they talk like learned academics. They talk like Oxford professors. And it's just hard to get over the fact that these are chickens who are sounding so erudite. So that's another way that Chaucer is kind of playing with the conventions of the beast fable. But there are other genres at work here too, and what I just said about Oxford professors comes into play. In many ways, big chunks of this tale anyway read very much like an academic treatise. I've already mentioned the long, learned discussion about dreams, but there's a similar kind of thing that the narrator provides concerning predestination. So for a while, it sort of seems like you're reading a theological tract or something like that. And by the way, this reveals something very important, which is that Chaucer was an incredibly learned, educated man who seemed to know everything about everything. He's got the classical learning, so Greek and Roman classics. He's got the biblical learning. I think that the translator points out in his introduction that in his works, Chaucer makes allusions to every single book of the Bible. He's also very interested in science. Chaucer knows a fair amount about science, so there's a whole sort of theory of the vapors that one of the chickens offers in this story, which kind of reflects Chaucer's scientific learning. So he's interested in everything, and he's a bit of a show-off. He likes to kind of show us that he knows these things. So this is very typical, I think, of Chaucer. Two other genres that are in play here. One is sort of high courtly literature or romance literature. Um, I won't sort of go deeply into that. If you've taken 101, you should know the conventions of a romance. If you look at page 215 onto 216, let me read you a passage where we see um, sort of elements of romance. Um, so Chanticleer has already been introduced, and now we're going to come to meet Pertolote. Two lines from the bottom on 215. She, with the loveliest dyes upon her throat, was known as gracious Lady Pertolote. Courteous she was, on to 216. Courteous she was, discreet and debonair, companionable too, and took such care in her deportment, since she was 7 days old, she held the heart of Chanticleer controlled, locked up securely in her every limb. Oh, what a happiness his love to him. So these are described as almost two characters in a courtly romance, right? She's Lady Pertolote. She's elegant. She's debonair, just as we might expect a heroine of a romance to be. Finally, the last genre I want to mention that's in play is tragedy. Okay. At first, Chanticleer is kind of introduced to us as a tragic figure of sorts, doomed by fate to be devoured by the fox. And when he is abducted by the fox, he is lamented by the hens in a manner that evokes both biblical and classical references. So if you look at 228, his wives, his mourning wives, now he's not dead, but he's been abducted. His mourning wives are compared to the women of Troy. So look down towards the bottom of 228. Sure, never such a cry or lamentation was made by ladies of high Trojan station, when Ilium fell and Pyrrhus with his sword grabbed Priam by the beard, their king and lord, and slew him there, as the Aeneas tells, as what was uttered by those hens. So the abduction of a chicken by a fox is compared to sort of the most mythical and famous war in history, the Trojan War. The fox, for his part, a couple of pages earlier, is compared to none other than Judas Iscariot, right? So implicitly, Chanticleer is sort of compared to Jesus, and the fox's abduction of Chanticleer is compared to Judas Iscariot's betrayal of Jesus. I mean, absolutely, utterly absurd. Chaucer knows this. This is all calculated for comic effect. And I mentioned a moment ago, about movie genres. Let me just try to offer a parallel from movies today that might help you better appreciate and understand what Chaucer is doing. I think some of the most interesting filmmakers today and in the past are filmmakers who are well versed in a number of different genres. They don't just do comedies, or they don't just do action movies. They know a whole bunch of different genres and are willing to combine them in interesting ways. And the filmmaker that came to my mind thinking about Chaucer is Edgar Wright, who's a British filmmaker who's made movies like Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead. These are hilarious movies. One of the reasons why these movies, I think he also did Baby Driver, I haven't seen that yet. One of the things that really makes these movies stand out is the way they combine and shuffle genres. So in Shaun of the Dead, anyway, you've got elements of a horror film, elements of a buddy cop film, elements of romantic comedy, and they're combined in such a way that the result is hilarity, right? There's something really comedic that happens when you bring conventions from different genres together. And I think that's very much the effect that Chaucer was aiming for in his tales as well. So I've just been presenting the Nun's Priest Tale to you. Haven't not assuming you've read it yet, but that will allow you as you read it to really pay attention to some of the ways that Chaucer messes with genre. All right.